Hey guys, welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing a review and swatch video on all of the new Wet n Wild palettes versus the old palettes. I've had a lot of you guys ask me, you know, what's the difference between the old palettes and the new palettes? You know, can you show us swatches? So that's what I'm doing for you guys today. I'm gonna go through each one and I'm gonna compare them, tell you guys what the differences are, let you know my thoughts about these new palettes. You guys know how much I love the Wet n Wild eyeshadow palettes. Like, these color icon palettes have been a staple in my makeup collection since the very beginning of my YouTube channel. I love all of their palettes and I think their eyeshadows are amazing quality. So I was kind of skeptical and a little upset that they were discontinuing these because I love these so much. The one thing that I was super excited about though with the new palettes, even though I was kind of sad that these were going away, was the fact that they added transitional shades in all of their palettes, in the little ones, in the large ones, and I thought that that was super cool because that was the one thing that was always missing in their palettes, and I always had to reach for another palette that had a transition shade, or I would reach for my bronzer. So I was super stoked about that. I went out to Walgreens because I heard that they were releasing all of their stuff at Walgreens, and luckily my local Walgreens had all the palettes there, so I bought all of them so I could do this video. Plus I wanted to compare and see if they were as good as the old ones. If you cannot find them at your local Walgreens, you can also get them on Wet n Wild's website, and I've also seen these palettes on Amazon as well. So I'll link down below where you can get all these palettes if you are like really anxious to get them and you can't find them at your local Walgreens. And I'm sure the other drugstores will start carrying these soon once Wet n Wild launches all of their new makeup in 2018. With the formula of the eyeshadow, it is different. With the old eyeshadow palettes from Wet n Wild, you guys know how buttery these palettes were. Like, if you've ever used any Wet n Wild eyeshadow, like their old formula was just super buttery. When you would go to swatch it, you would just get such a great pigmentation on it. They weren't powdery or chalky at all. Great quality eyeshadows. So with the new ones, the formula is a little different. When you go to swatch it, especially when you swatch it for the first time, it doesn't feel super buttery. But once you get that first layer of eyeshadow off, it is a little more buttery. It's not quite as buttery as the original formula, and this new formula is slightly powdery, but the pigmentation on these eyeshadows are really good and the blendability is really awesome as well. And with the new formula, it is a good buildable formula. So you can build the color up so you have a little bit more control, where I feel like with the old formula, it was so pigmented that whenever you went in, you had to be really careful, especially with some of the darker shades, or it was really hard to blend out. I feel like with the new palette, even though the darker shades are really pigmented, they're easier to blend out. I mean, I still love the old formula, and in some ways I wish that they would have just kept their old shadows like they had them, but just added some of the transition shades to these palettes. But I'm not disappointed in these. Like, I was really surprised. So I'm gonna go through each of the palettes now, and I'm gonna show you all swatches of the old ones with the new ones. First, I'm just gonna be comparing the Wet n Wild Comfort Zone palette. I'm basing the swatches off of the old palette. So that first set of swatches that I'm gonna show you guys is with the bronze shades. The biggest difference with the bronzy shades and the two colors that I was a little disappointed in with the new palette is that first gold shade and with the dark bronzy shade. Those two colors in the new palette aren't quite as pigmented as in the old palette, and I do find with that gold shade, it's not as shimmery as it was in the old palette. So that is my two biggest disappointments in the new palette, but overall I'm very happy with the new palette. With the other two bronzy colors, they're pretty much the same color. They are slightly a little different, but honestly, as you can see with them swatched, there's not much of a difference. Now with the green shades, They really stepped up with a lot of the green shades. They improved the duochrome, that dark green and the green. They improved the pigmentation on those colors. And with that kind of bronzy taupe color, that color is slightly different in the new palette. It's a little more of like a bronze taupe, whereas in the old palette, it was almost like a grayish gold taupe. So that color did change. I'm not mad at that color change because I do really like that new bronzy color. I feel like I'll reach for that color more. I felt like in the old palette, I never really used that color that much. I just felt like that color was a little weird on my skin tone. So overall, I am happy with the new Comfort Zone palette. Like I said, I wish they wouldn't have changed that dark brown or the gold because it was really good in the old palette. But overall, I think they did improve the other colors, and I'm very happy with this palette. I'm gonna be comparing the Silent Treatment palette. So as you can see, the differences there is they added a transition shade up top, and the other colors in the palette are a little smaller, except for the lid shade. It's probably about the same size as the old one, maybe a little bigger. With the swatches here, you can see that with the pink shade, it is a little different in the new palette. It's not quite as shimmery and it's a little less pink than in the old palette. With the crease shade, it is more pigmented and darker. So they did improve that shade. So I'm very happy with that. And then with the taupe, it is a little different in color. It still has great pigmentation and it's still, you know, really shimmery. That new color is a little less of a taupe purple and more of like a bronzy taupe. So they did kind of change the color on that, and I am really happy with that transition shade that they added in the Silent Treatment palette. I feel like that color goes great with the other shades, and that shade is a pretty close dupe to the Urban Decay eyeshadow in Tease. So that's the differences on that palette. Moving on to the Walking on Eggshells. With the transition shade in this, I really like this transition shade. This is a good kind of everyday, like your basic, not too cool tone, not too warm tone, just kind of mid-tone brown transition color. And I feel like this shade goes perfect with the other colors in this palette. I would say the biggest difference is that most of the colors in the new palette aren't quite as shimmery as in the old palette, and that pink shade is not as light as it was in the old palette. In the new palette, it's more pink, and in the old palette, it was more of like a lighter pink. So that's the biggest difference between the new and the old palette when it comes to the Walking on Eggshells. The pigmentation is still awesome on the new palette. Now moving on to Swedish Candy. With the new palette, they added a matte dark brown transition shade, which actually works out really well with the colors, the other colors. Maybe I would have liked it a little better if they would have made this color maybe a little warmer, because it's kind of close to the other shade in this palette. As you can see with the swatches, with the new palette, it's a little less shimmery than the old. And with the pink shade, the pink is a little more pink than the old palette. So it's kind of like the same situation as the Walking on Eggshells. How the colors aren't quite as shimmery and the pink is a little more pink. But overall, I love the new palette. The pigmentation is really good. It's really easy to blend out. The next palette that I'm comparing is the Nude Awakening palette, which they did have this in their old formula. They sold this palette exclusively at Walmart. And I actually got rid of this palette when I decluttered my eyeshadow palettes. So I just dug this out of like my giveaway box so I could compare it for you guys in this video. I wish that with the new packaging they would have just made them like this. I think that would have been kind of cool, and maybe just not had this bottom part where you put the makeup brushes. I don't know. I mean, the new packaging is okay too, but I don't know. I did enjoy the packaging on this. With the shades in this, for the most part, the colors, the pigmentation is about the same. Some of the darker shades, when I went to swatch them at first in the new palette, didn't seem like they swatched real good, but then whenever I swatched it in comparison to each other on my arm, as you will see when I have my arm all the way out, a lot of the darker shades looked pretty similar. With that burgundy color that's in the Ode palette, it is a little more burgundy, and with the new palette, it's a little bit more of like it's a little different. It's not quite as red. I wish that they wouldn't have changed that color because that was my favorite color in the palette. But overall, the new one is okay. Some of the lighter shades, the color is a little different, as you can see in my swatches. Overall, I'm okay with this new Nude Awakening palette. I mean, that palette was never really my favorite. I don't know, I never really reached for that one that much, so we'll just see. Maybe I'll end up liking the new one better than the old one. The next ones that I'm going to be comparing are the single shadows, and the only ones that I picked up that were similar to the old ones, I know that they have some other ones that are similar to the old colors, but the only old ones that I had was in Nutty and in Brulee. So first I'm just going to compare Brulee. I mean, the size of the eyeshadows are pretty much the same. With these new ones, they don't have a print on the shadow. I know on the old ones they kind of had that design on the eyeshadow, where the new ones, they don't have a design. With this new Brulee eyeshadow, I mean, it's just as pigmented as the Ode formula, but the shade is lighter than the old one. And I'm perfectly okay with that, just because for me, I never used the Ode Brulee eyeshadow that much. I really needed a highlight shade that was a little lighter, so I like the new formula better in the Brulee. I know some people might be upset that the shade is lighter, but for me, I like that because I know I'll reach for it more as a brow bone highlight. And then with Nutty, I mean, the same thing goes with the packaging. The old one had that design on it where the new one does not. The pigmentation is really good on this. The formula is really good. The main difference between this and the old one is the new formula is a little more warm toned. It's not as much of a cool toned, like bronzy taupe as the old Nutty. So that's the biggest difference with that. Now I'm just gonna move on to the other eyeshadows that they added to this collection. So they added two other, I guess it's 10 pan eyeshadows now, since they added the two transition shades. But they added the Rose in the Air palette. And this palette is beautiful. I cannot wait to do tutorials with this. This palette is supposed to be a dupe to the Anastasia Beverly Hills Modern Renaissance palette. People say that this palette is a dupe to that, and I have seen swatches and it definitely looks like a good affordable dupe to that palette. So I cannot wait to do some tutorials with this. It looks absolutely beautiful. The pigmentation is really great. I love the two transition shades in this. So yeah, I'm so excited for this palette. It's probably like my favorite of the new palettes that they released. The other new 10 pan eyeshadow that they released is Not a Basic Peach. And I did want to show you guys this next to their Ode palette. It was a limited edition palette that they had released several years ago, but it was called Sparkle Till Morning. And some of the colors reminded me of that in this Not a Basic Peach palette. They are different, but the color kind of reminded me of that palette. And this is another palette that I'm super excited to do some tutorials with. If you don't have the Too Faced Sweet Peach palette, some of the colors might be sort of similar to that palette because some of the shades kind of remind me of that, but it's definitely not a dupe to that palette because that palette has a ton of eyeshadows in it. The colors are really pretty. I feel like I'll get a lot of use out of this palette in the summer because I feel like a lot of these colors are good summertime colors. The other three little quads that they released, this first one is in Lights Out, which I used to create this eyeshadow look that I'm wearing today. This is my New Year's Eve makeup tutorial that I'm gonna post next week for you guys. I love the colors in here. I think it is perfect for creating a smoky eye. As you can see, like a smoky black cat eye. It's beautiful. I love the eyelid color. It's a beautiful green gray color. It's so pretty. The next little quad is in Petalette, and this has some beautiful purple shades in it. If you were sad that they discontinued the Petal Pusher, maybe get this one. I know it doesn't have near the colors that the Petal Pusher had, but I am excited to create some purple eyeshadow looks with this because whenever I swatch the shades, they were really pretty. The only shade in this that I wasn't super crazy about is this white. It didn't seem to have really good pigmentation, so I'll just have to see how I feel about that whenever I do some tutorials with this palette. But the other purples are beautiful, and I really like this purple over here, the eyelid color. It's so pretty. It's like a really glowy purple. And then the last quad, or the last eyeshadow in this new Wet n Wild collection, is called Hooked on Vinyl, and it has some really unique colors in here. It has this peachy golden transition shade. It has this nice bronzy gold, warm cream highlight, kind of like a navy green shimmer color, which I don't know. This palette I'm not as drawn to as the others, but I think if you had really pretty like blue or green eyes, I think this little quad would be beautiful and perfect. So yeah, that is my review and swatches of the new versus the old Wet n Wild eyeshadow palettes. I hope that you guys did enjoy this, and I hope I didn't leave anything important out. I'm going to be doing tutorials on all these new palettes, so stay on the lookout for those, and I'll link down below all the ones that I have done so far. If you are new to my channel, please don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you guys in my next video, and I hope that you guys have a great day. Bye-bye.